I learned how to hide the marks before I learned how to ask for help. The mirror in the employee restroom buzzed softly above me, flickering like it couldn't decide whether to show the truth or let me keep pretending. And for a second, I almost wished it would go dark completely, but it didn't. It never did. It just stayed there, steady and unforgiving, reflecting every careful layer I had built to survive another shift, another night. Another version of myself that smiled when spoken to and kept her head down when it mattered. My fingers moved automatically, dabbing concealer along my wrist, blending it into my skin until the faint discoloration disappeared under a shade that wasn't quite mine, but close enough for strangers who weren't looking closely, and nobody ever looked closely. Not really. Not unless they had a reason. Not unless they wanted something. I pulled the sleeve of my uniform down just a little farther, the fabric brushing against my skin like a quiet promise that nothing would show, nothing would slip, nothing would give me away. Outside the door, I could already hear the restaurant shifting into its late-night rhythm. Glasses clinking, low conversations humming under soft jazz. The kind of place where people came to forget their problems while someone like me made sure their water glasses stayed full. I checked the time on my phone. 10:42 p.m. 18 minutes left until I could clock out. 18 minutes until I could go home and convince myself that tomorrow would be different. That tomorrow I'd find a way out. I always told myself that. And somehow tomorrow always looked exactly like today. I took a slow breath, steady, practiced, and stepped back into the hallway. The air cooler, quieter, like the calm before something I couldn't quite name. Hannah, Marco's voice cut through the corridor before I even reached the floor, sharp and impatient. VIP table just came in. You're covering it. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt inevitable, like the universe had a habit of placing me exactly where I didn't want to be. I'm off in 15, I said, keeping my voice light. Careful, the way you do when you don't want to. Sound like you're asking for too much. Marco didn't even look at me, just waved a hand like he was brushing away something insignificant. Then make it quick, he muttered, already turning away. And that was that. No argument, no choice, just another quiet decision made for me. I grabbed a tray, the polished surface reflecting the soft glow of the overhead lights, and stepped onto the floor. The restaurant was alive now, full of expensive suits and effortless laughter, people who didn't notice. The small things, people who didn't need to. And then I saw the table, tucked into the far corner like it owned the room without trying, for men, all in dark tailored suits, the kind that fit too well to be off the rack, the kind that said money without saying a word. But it wasn't them that made me stop for half a second. It was him, seated at the head, still, composed, like everything around him moved because he allowed it to. Adrian Russo. I didn't know his name yet, not officially, but I felt it anyway. The weight of it, the kind of presence you don't question because something in you already knows better. His eyes lifted before I even reached the table, dark, steady, and when they met mine, something inside my chest tightened, not fear exactly, not yet, just awareness, like standing too close to the edge of something you couldn't see the bottom of. I forced my steps forward, balancing the tray with practiced ease. Good evening, I said, my voice smooth, polite, the version of me that belonged here, that knew how to disappear in plain sight. I reached to set down a glass, my hand steady until it wasn't, until his gaze followed the movement, until my sleeve shifted just enough, just a fraction of an inch, and then his hand moved, not fast, not rough, just precise, fingers closing gently around my wrist, stopping me, anchoring me in place. And everything else in the room faded into something distant and irrelevant as his thumb brushed lightly against my skin, right where the fabric had slipped, right where the truth lived underneath everything I had tried to hide. And for the first time that night, I realized someone was actually looking. His grip was not tight, but it did not need to be. It was the kind of hold that made movement feel unnecessary, like my body had already decided not to pull away before my mind could catch up. And for a second I forgot how to breathe, forgot the tray in my other hand, forgot the noise of the restaurant. Everything narrowed down to the space between his fingers and my skin where the fabric had betrayed me. I felt the air shift, subtle but real, like the entire table had gone quiet without anyone saying a word. His thumb did not press harder, did not hurt. It just rested there, deliberate, as if confirming something he had already suspected. And when I finally found my voice, it came out smaller than I wanted, thinner. "It is nothing," I said, the words automatic, practiced, the same answer I had given 100 times to people who never asked twice. But he did not let go. Not immediately. His eyes stayed on my wrist for a second longer before lifting to meet mine again. And something in them had changed, not softer, not kinder, just darker, like a door had opened behind them and I was not supposed to see what was inside. "Nothing does not look like this," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only I could hear it, controlled, measured, like every word had been weighed before it was spoken. My heart picked up, fast and uneven, not because he was angry, but because he was not, because there was no frustration in his tone, no annoyance over the spilled water slowly dripping onto the white tablecloth. Just focus. And that was somehow worse. I pulled my hand back gently this time. Testing. And he let it go. Just like that. No resistance, no fight. But the absence of pressure did not feel like freedom. It felt like permission, and I did not know what that meant. I adjusted my sleeve quickly, smoothing it down as if that could erase the moment entirely. "I am sorry about the glass," I added, forcing myself back into routine, into the script that kept everything simple and safe. But he did not even glance at the mess. One of the other men at the table shifted slightly, like he was about to say something, then stopped when Adrian lifted a single finger, not even looking at him, and the silence that followed was immediate, absolute. I had seen people listen before, but not like that, not with this kind of instinctive obedience. It sent a quiet chill through me. I finished setting the rest of the table as quickly as I could without rushing, every movement careful, aware of his gaze tracking me, not in the way customers usually looked, not distracted, not casual. It was intentional, like he was memorizing something, like he had decided I mattered for a reason I did not understand. When I stepped back, ready to leave, to disappear into the safety of distance, his voice stopped me again. "Hannah," he said, and I froze, because I had not told him my name, because I knew I had not, and the sound of it coming from him felt different, heavier, like it carried something with it. I turned slowly, forcing myself to meet his eyes even though every instinct told me not to. "Yes," I answered, my voice steady this time. Barely. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable, calm on the surface, but there was something underneath it, something that made the room feel smaller. "Does he know you are here tonight?" he asked, and the question did not make sense at first, not until it did, not until the meaning settled in and my stomach tightened. I should have denied it, should have played confused, should have kept everything separate the way I always did. But for a second I hesitated, and that was enough. His eyes sharpened just slightly. Catching the pause, storing it away, I shook my head quickly. "There is no one," I said, too fast, too clean, and I knew he heard it. I knew he recognized the lie even if he did not call it out. He studied me for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, like he had reached a decision I was not part of. "Be careful," he said finally, simple, almost casual, but the way he said it made it sound like something else entirely, like a warning, like a promise. I stepped away from the table then, my legs steady only because I forced them to be, the tray still in my hand even though I could not remember picking it up again. And as I walked back toward the kitchen, the noise of the restaurant slowly returned, conversations blending back into place, glasses clinking, everything normal, everything exactly the same as before, except it was not, because for the first time in a long time, I had the distinct feeling that something had just shifted, something I could not see yet, something that had nothing to do with spilled water or a careless sleeve, and everything to do with the way he had looked at me like he had already decided what came next. I did not remember finishing the rest of that shift, not in any clear way. It felt like moving through something thick and slow, like every step was slightly delayed from my own thoughts. I refilled glasses, cleared plates, smiled when spoken to, but none of it felt connected to me anymore. Like I had stepped half an inch outside of myself and left the version of Hannah that people recognized to do the work, and somewhere behind all of that, I could still feel it, the ghost of his touch on my wrist, not painful, not forceful, just present, like a mark that had nothing to do with skin. By the time Marco told me I could clock out, I did not argue, did not linger. I moved straight to the back, grabbed my bag from the locker, and pushed through the exit into the alley behind the restaurant. The night air hit me immediately, cool and sharp against my face, and I pulled my jacket tighter even though it was not that cold. It was just habit, just another layer between me and anything that might see too much. The city was quieter back here, the distant hum of traffic replacing the constant noise inside. And for a moment, I just stood there, breathing, letting the silence settle around me, telling myself it was over, that whatever had happened inside did not matter out here, that people like him existed in rooms like that and nowhere else, that I could walk away and everything would go back to the way it was. I started toward the street, my sneakers soft against the pavement, my mind already moving ahead to the next part of the night. The part one never looked forward to, the part one always tried to delay just a little longer, maybe stop for coffee, maybe sit somewhere bright and public until I felt ready. But I knew I would not. I never did. Routine had a way of pulling me back whether I wanted it to or not. I reached the corner and turned, the streetlights stretching in a long line ahead, casting everything in that dim yellow glow that made the world feel both safer and more exposed at the same time. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the sound sharp in the quiet, and my stomach tightened before I even looked at it. I already knew who it would be. I always knew. I pulled it out slowly, the screen lighting up with a name I had learned to respond to before it could become a problem. I hesitated for just a second, my thumb hovering over the screen, thinking about the question Adrian had asked, the way he had said it, like he already knew the answer, like he had seen something I had tried so hard to keep hidden. I swallowed and answered, keeping my voice steady. I am on my way, I said before the other voice could say anything, before there could be questions, before there could be tone. I ended the call quickly and slipped the phone back into my pocket, my steps picking up just a little, not running, never running, just moving fast enough to avoid being noticed, to avoid giving anyone a reason to look too closely. The apartment building came into view a few minutes later, the same cracked steps, the same flickering light above the entrance, everything exactly where it had always been, familiar in a way that did not feel comforting anymore. I reached for the door, my hand pausing for just a second on the handle, and for the first time in a long time, I thought about turning around, about walking in the opposite direction and not stopping, about seeing how far I could get before anything caught up to me. But the thought faded as quickly as it came, replaced by the same quiet certainty that it was not that simple. It never was. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The hallway dim and narrow, the air still, and as it closed behind me, I had the strange, unshakable feeling that something had followed me out of that restaurant. Not a person, not footsteps, just a decision, something already set in motion, something I had not agreed to but could not stop. And somewhere across the city, I knew without understanding how, that Adrian Russo had not forgotten what he saw, and that whatever came next was already beginning. I kept my eyes down as I walked down the hallway, counting my steps the way I always did, 12 from the door to the stairs, another 16 to the second-floor landing, the rhythm of it grounding me, giving me something predictable to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. The building was quiet tonight. No television noise leaking through thin walls, no voices echoing from other apartments, just the low hum of old wiring and the soft creak of wood beneath my feet. I reached my door and paused, my hand hovering over the knob, as that same feeling from outside returned, sharper now, like something waiting just on the other side. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves, just the leftover tension from a long shift and a stranger who looked too closely. I turned the handle and stepped inside, the familiar scent of the apartment wrapping around me, detergent, stale air, something faintly metallic I could never quite place. Everything exactly where I had left it, the small couch against the wall, the dim lamp casting a soft yellow glow, the silence heavier here, more contained. I set my bag down carefully, too carefully, like any sudden movement might disturb something fragile. "You are late." His voice came from the kitchen, low and even, not loud, not angry, just there, and my body reacted before my mind did, shoulders tightening, breath catching just slightly. I turned toward the sound, forcing my expression neutral, controlled, the version of me that knew how to navigate this space without making anything worse. "Work was busy," I said, keeping my tone light, casual, like it was nothing, like everything was normal. He stepped into view a moment later, leaning against the doorway with that same quiet stillness I had learned to read over time, not explosive, Not unpredictable in the way people imagined, just steady, watchful, like he was always waiting for something I could not see. His eyes moved over me slowly, taking in details I wished he would. Ignore the way my jacket hung, the way my hands stayed close to my sides, the way I avoided looking directly at him for too long. You did not answer earlier, he said. And there it was, not an accusation, not yet, just an observation. I nodded slightly, slipping my phone out of my pocket and placing it on the table like proof, like that would make the moment easier. I was working, I repeated, softer this time. And for a second, he did not respond, just watched, the silence stretching just enough to make my pulse quicken. I moved past him toward the sink, turning on the faucet, letting the sound of running water fill the space between us. Something normal, something ordinary. I focused on it, on the way it splashed against the metal, on the way my hands moved under it, steady, controlled, but I could feel his gaze on me, constant, unblinking. And then he spoke again, closer now. The distance between us shrinking without me noticing when he had moved. Who were you with tonight? He asked, and the question settled heavily in the room. Not loud, not sharp, just present. I shook my head quickly, too quickly. No one, I said. The answer automatic, practiced, the same lie shaped into something that sounded like truth. And for a second I thought that would be enough, that it would pass like it always did. But then his hand reached out, not fast, not sudden, just deliberate, fingers brushing lightly against my sleeve. And my entire body stilled, every muscle tightening under that simple contact. My breath shallow, controlled, waiting, always waiting. He did not pull, did not force, just let his fingers rest there for a second before withdrawing. His expression unreadable, but something in his eyes had shifted, something quiet and calculating, like he had noticed something different, something new. You should be more careful, he said finally, stepping back just enough to give the illusion of space, and I nodded. Even though I did not know what he meant, even though I did, a little. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier, and as I stood there, my hands still damp from the sink, I realized that tonight had not ended when I left the restaurant. It had followed me here, into this space, into this moment, and whatever Adrian Russo had seen, whatever he had understood in that single glance, it was no longer just mine to hide, because for the first time, someone else had noticed, and something in me knew that silence was not going to hold forever. Sleep did not come easily that night. It never really did. But this time it felt different, heavier somehow, like my thoughts refused to settle into their usual quiet patterns. I lay on the edge of the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling where faint cracks stretched like thin lines of something breaking slowly over time. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, not the apartment, not the hallway, but the way Adrian had looked at me, the way his gaze had not moved away, not rushed, not distracted, just fixed, like he had already decided something without needing to say it out loud. I turned onto my side, pulling the sleeve of my jacket down instinctively even though there was no one there to see it, the fabric brushing against my wrist like a shield I did not trust anymore, because it had not worked, because someone had seen through it without even trying, and that thought stayed with me longer than anything else. Not fear exactly, but exposure, like a door I had kept. Locked for years had been opened without my permission, and now I could not close it again. The room felt smaller as the hours passed, the air still, the silence louder than it should have been. I must have drifted off at some point because the next thing I knew, morning light was cutting through the thin curtains, pale and unforgiving. The kind of light that made everything look too real. I sat up slowly, my body stiff, my mind already moving ahead, already preparing for the routine that kept everything in place. I moved quietly through the apartment, careful not to make unnecessary noise. The same careful steps, the same controlled movements, everything measured, predictable, safe. He was not in the kitchen when I passed it, not in the living room either, and that alone should have felt like relief, but it did not. It felt like something unfinished, like a pause instead of an ending. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, my hand hesitating just for a second before I stepped outside. The hallway empty again, the building just as quiet as the night before. I exhaled slowly, letting the air fill my lungs fully for the first time since I had woken up, telling myself it was just another day, just another shift, just another version of the same story. The walk to the bus stop felt longer than usual, every sound sharper, every passing car louder, like my senses had not settled back into their normal rhythm yet. I kept my eyes forward, my pace steady, blending into the flow of people who did not notice each other, who did not look twice, who did not ask questions, and for a moment, that felt like safety again, like I had stepped back into a world where everything made sense. But the feeling did not last, because when I reached the corner near the restaurant, I saw it, a black car parked across the street, engine running. Windows dark enough to reflect the morning light like mirrors. It should have meant nothing. Just another car in a city full of them. But something about it felt wrong. Too still, too deliberate. I slowed slightly without meaning to, my eyes flicking toward it just for a second. And that was enough. The back door opened smoothly, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, like it had been waiting for that exact moment. And even before I saw him step out, I knew, not because I had expected it, but because something in me had already understood that last night was not over. That whatever decision had been made in that quiet moment at the table had not stayed there. Adrian Russo straightened as he stepped onto the sidewalk, his presence cutting through the ordinary morning like it did not belong there, like the world had adjusted itself around him without asking permission. And when his eyes found mine again, steady, certain, it felt less like coincidence and more like something inevitable. Something already set in motion that I was only just beginning to understand. I stopped walking without realizing it, my breath catching just slightly, not from fear, not entirely, but from the quiet certainty that whatever came next was no longer something I could walk away from. Because this time, he had come into my world, and that changed everything. He did not rush toward me, did not call out my name, did not make a scene. He simply stood there beside the open car door like he had always been part of this street, like the city itself had made room for him without question, and somehow that made it harder to move, harder to pretend I had not seen him, because ignoring something that obvious felt impossible. My feet slowed until they stopped completely, my fingers tightening slightly around the strap of my bag as I tried to decide whether to turn around, to walk the other way, to pretend this was not happening. But my body did not listen. It never did when something felt inevitable. He took a single step forward then, closing the distance just enough to make it clear that this was not coincidence, not chance, his gaze steady on mine, not invasive, not demanding, just certain. "You are early," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational, like we were continuing something that had never really ended. And for a second I did not respond, my mind still catching up to the reality of him being here, outside, in daylight, in a place that had nothing to do with dim lights and quiet tables. "I have work," I answered finally, my voice measured, controlled, the same tone I used for everything that needed to stay simple. His eyes flicked briefly toward the restaurant across the street, then back to me, like he already knew that, like he had always known that. "I know," he said, and the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Not because it sounded threatening, but because it sounded informed, like this was not the first time he had been here, not the first time he had watched this routine unfold. I shifted my weight slightly, the movement small but deliberate, creating just enough distance to remind myself I still had control over where I stood. "Then why are you here?" I asked, and the question came out quieter than I intended, not confrontational, not sharp, just honest in a way I rarely allowed myself to be. He did not answer immediately, his gaze moving over me again, not lingering, not inappropriate, just observant, like he was confirming something he had already decided. And when he spoke, his words were simple. "Because you lied," he said, and the statement landed heavier than anything louder would have. I felt my breath catch for a fraction of a second, my mind immediately searching for a response, for a denial, for something that would restore the balance I was used to. "I do not know what you mean," I replied, the words automatic, familiar, but even as I said them, I knew they sounded thin, insufficient against the certainty in his expression. He tilted his head slightly, not mocking, not amused, just considering. "You said there was no one," he continued, his tone unchanged. "But someone is waiting for you to go home every night." My chest tightened at that, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, like it was a fact, like it was something already verified, already understood, and for the first time, a different kind of fear crept in, not the quiet, controlled kind I had learned to manage, but something sharper, something uncertain, You do not know anything about my life, I said, the words coming faster now, more defensive than I wanted them to be. He did not react to the shift, did not raise his voice, did not step closer. He simply watched me for a moment longer, and then his expression softened just enough to change the air between us. Not gentle, not warm, but less distant. I know enough, he said quietly. Enough to understand that you should not be walking back into that place alone. I shook my head immediately, the motion instinctive, rejecting the implication, rejecting the idea that he had any right to say that, to step into something that had nothing to do with him. It is not your concern, I said, more firmly this time, holding his gaze even though it felt like standing too close to something dangerous. And for a second, neither of us moved. The city continuing around us like we were not part of it, people passing by without looking, cars driving past without slowing. Everything normal except for this moment that felt anything but. And then he stepped back, just once, creating space where there had been none, his decision clear in the way his posture shifted, controlled, final. It became my concern the moment you stood in front of me and pretended you were fine, he said, his voice low, steady, not a threat, not a promise, just a statement that felt like both. And before I could respond, before I could find the right words to push him away, to re-establish the distance I needed, he reached into his jacket and placed something on the hood of the car between us, a small, simple card, unremarkable in every way except for the fact that it was now there, waiting. If you decide you do not want to keep pretending, he added, meeting my eyes one last time. You know where to find me. And then he turned, just like that, stepping back into the car without looking over his shoulder, the door closing with a quiet, precise sound that felt louder than it should have. The engine already running, the car pulling away smoothly into traffic as if it had never stopped at all, leaving me standing there on the sidewalk, the card still resting on the hood where he had placed it, the morning light catching its edges, and for a long moment, I did not move, did not reach for it, just stared, because for the first time, someone had not asked me to explain, had not demanded anything, had simply seen something I had spent years hiding and refused to ignore it, and I did not know whether that made me feel safer or more exposed than ever before. I did not pick up the card right away. I told myself I would not, that leaving it there would mean something, that it would draw a line between his world and mine, but my eyes kept drifting back to it, the clean white surface against the dark metal of the car hood, too simple to carry the weight it suddenly seemed to hold. People passed by without noticing, footsteps moving around me, voices blending into the morning noise, and still I stood there, caught between walking away and reaching out. Like the decision itself mattered more than whatever came after. I exhaled slowly and finally stepped forward, my fingers brushing against the edge of the card before I could stop myself. The paper cool and smooth, lighter than I expected. I turned it over once, twice, no unnecessary details, just a name and a number. Nothing dramatic, nothing that explained anything, and yet it felt heavier in my hand than it should have, like it carried a choice I had not been ready to face until now. I slipped it into my bag quickly, almost instinctively, like hiding it would make the moment disappear, like it would return things to the way they were before he stepped into my path. But it did not. The air still felt different. The street still felt too sharp, too aware. I forced myself to move, crossing toward the restaurant, pushing through the front door into the familiar warmth and noise, the scent of coffee and polished wood grounding me in something real, something I understood. I tied on my apron, checked my section, nodded at co-workers who barely glanced up, everything exactly the same as every other day. And for a few hours, I let myself believe that was enough, that routine could cover everything else, that if I kept moving, kept working, kept smiling when expected, the rest would stay quiet. But it did not stay quiet. It followed me in small ways, in the way my hand lingered near my bag every time my phone buzzed, in the way my eyes drifted toward the entrance whenever the door opened, in the way I replayed his words without meaning to. You pretended you were fine, the sentence repeating in my head with a weight that would not fade. By the time my shift ended, the sun had started to dip, casting long shadows across the street outside, and that familiar tension returned. Subtle at first, then stronger, the quiet calculation of what came next, the walk back, the door, the silence that never felt empty. I stepped outside, adjusting my jacket again. The motion automatic, protective, and for a moment, I hesitated, my gaze moving down the block, half expecting to see that same car, that same still presence waiting without explanation. But the street was empty this time, ordinary, unremarkable, just another evening settling into place. I told myself that was good, that it meant nothing had changed, that whatever had started this morning had ended just as quickly. But the thought did not settle the way it should have. It felt incomplete, like something was missing, rather than resolved. I started walking anyway, my pace steady, my focus forward, the card still tucked safely out of sight but not out of mind. And as I reached my building again, the same cracked steps, the same flickering light. I felt it, that quiet shift in the air, not as sharp as before, not as immediate, but there, lingering just beneath the surface, like a question waiting to be answered. I reached for the door and paused, just for a second, my hand resting against the worn metal handle, and without thinking, my other hand moved to my bag, fingers brushing against the edge of the card hidden inside. And for the first time, the thought came clearly, not as fear, not as hesitation, but as something else entirely, something quieter, more dangerous in its own way. What if walking back into that apartment was no longer the only option? The idea stayed with me as I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The hallway stretching out in front of me, familiar and unchanged, and yet somehow different, because now, for the first time, I knew there was another door somewhere in this city, one I had not opened yet, one that might lead somewhere I did not understand, and that possibility alone was enough to make everything else feel less certain than it had ever been. I knew the moment I stepped inside that something was off, not loud, not obvious, just a subtle shift in the way the air settled, like a room that had been waiting too long without anyone moving through it. I closed the door behind me slowly, the click of the lock sounding sharper than usual, and for a second I stood there, listening, the silence stretching just enough to make my chest tighten. "You are later than yesterday." His voice came from the living room this time, not the kitchen, not distant, closer, and I felt that familiar reaction move through me before I could stop it, a quiet tension settling into my shoulders, my breath adjusting without permission. I stepped forward carefully, my eyes finding him sitting on the edge of the couch, not relaxed, not distracted, just present, like he had been there for a while, waiting without needing to show it. "My shift ran late," I said, my voice even. Controlled, the same answer shaped to fit the same pattern, but tonight it felt thinner somehow, less convincing even to me. His gaze lifted to meet mine, steady, searching, not angry, not loud, just aware, and for the first time, I noticed something else beneath it, something sharper, more focused, like he was looking for something specific instead of just watching. "You are different tonight," he said quietly, and the words landed heavier than they should have, not because they were loud, but because they were true. I shook my head slightly, moving past him toward the small table, setting my bag down with more care than necessary. "I am tired," I replied, reaching for something simple, something that did not require explanation, but I could feel it, the way the space behind me shifted, the way he stood, the way his presence followed without closing the distance completely. "No," he said, not arguing, not pushing, just correcting. "You are thinking about something." My hand paused on the edge of the table, just for a second, and that was enough. I knew he saw it. I knew he noticed the hesitation, the smallest break in routine, and for a moment I considered denying it again, keeping everything contained the way I always had. But the words did not come as easily this time. They did not feel as automatic, because something else was there now, something new, something I had not had before. I turned slightly, not fully facing him, just enough to acknowledge the space between us. "It does not matter," I said, quieter now, and the truth of it surprised me, not because it was honest, but because it was not, because it did matter, because the card in my bag felt heavier with every second that passed, because the memory of that morning had not faded the way everything else usually did. He stepped closer then, not abruptly, not forcefully, just enough to stand within reach, and for a second, neither of us moved, the air between us still, balanced, like something was waiting to shift. His hand lifted slightly, not touching, not yet, just hovering near my sleeve as if he already knew what was underneath it, and my body reacted the same way it always did, still controlled, prepared, But something else moved beneath that reaction this time. Something quieter, something that did not belong to fear. He stopped before making contact, his gaze holding mine instead, searching for something I could not name. Who was he? He asked, and the question was different from the others. Not casual, not distant, direct in a way that left no space to ignore it. My breath caught, just for a moment. Not because I did not understand the question, but because I did, because it connected too easily to everything I had been trying not to think about. I could have lied. I should have lied. That was what I always did. What kept everything stable. What kept everything predictable. But the words stayed in my throat this time, caught somewhere between instinct and something new, something uncertain. And for the first time, I realized that the silence I had relied on for so long was starting to feel different, not protective, not safe, just heavy, like something that could break if I held onto it too tightly. I looked down briefly, my fingers brushing against the edge of my bag again, feeling the outline of the card hidden inside. And when I looked back up, my voice was softer, but it did not hide. Someone who saw something I did not want him to see. I said, and the moment the words left my mouth, I felt it, the shift, small but undeniable, like a line had been crossed that I could not step back over. His expression did not change dramatically, no sudden reaction, no raised voice, just a subtle tightening in his gaze, a quiet understanding settling into place. And for the first time, I realized that whatever had begun outside that restaurant had not just followed me home. It had changed something inside it, something that made this space feel different, less controlled, less certain. And as we stood there, the silence between us no longer empty, but full of something neither of us had said yet. I understood one thing clearly, the moment I chose to speak, even just a little, everything had already started to change. The words hung in the air longer than they should have, longer than I expected them to, and for a moment neither of us moved, like the room itself was waiting to see what would happen next. His gaze did not leave mine, not immediately, and there was something different in it now, not just observation, not just control, but recognition, like he understood more than I had said, like the space between my words had told him everything I had tried to keep hidden. I felt my pulse in my throat, steady but louder than before, not from fear alone, but from the unfamiliar weight of having said something real, even if it was only a fragment. He exhaled slowly, the smallest shift, but enough to break the stillness, his hand lowered, no longer hovering near my sleeve, no longer reaching, and the distance between us felt deliberate, chosen. You should not have to hide that, he said quietly, and the simplicity of it caught me off guard. Not a command, not a question, just a statement that felt almost out of place in a room where everything had always been measured, controlled, and unspoken. I let out a small breath I did not realize I had been holding, my fingers tightening slightly against the edge of my bag, the card inside pressing faintly against the fabric, reminding me of the other conversation waiting somewhere beyond these walls. Some things are easier if they stay hidden. I replied, my voice softer now, not defensive, just tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable, but there was a shift in the tension, not gone, not resolved, just different, like something had been acknowledged that could not be ignored anymore. Easier does not mean safer, he said, and the words settled deeper than anything else he had said tonight, because they were not new, because some part of me had always known that, had just chosen not to think about it. I looked away briefly, my gaze dropping to the floor, to the small details that made this place familiar, predictable, and suddenly, too small. The silence returned, but it was not the same kind of silence as before. It was not empty, not avoidant. It was full of something unspoken, something waiting, and I knew, without needing to be told, that if I stayed here, if I kept following the same steps, nothing would change. Everything would remain exactly as it had always been, controlled, contained, and quietly breaking. My hand moved before I fully decided, reaching into my bag, my fingers closing around the edge of the card. I hesitated for a second, just long enough to feel the weight of the choice, just long enough to understand that this was not about him or Adrian or anyone else. It was about whether I was willing to step outside the pattern I had built my life around. I pulled the card out slowly, the white surface catching the dim light of the room, and for a moment I just looked at it, the name, the number, Simple, direct, nothing hidden, nothing complicated, a door, just like I had thought earlier, one that led somewhere unknown. I felt his gaze on it, then on me, but he did not reach for it, did not comment, did not try to take it away, and that alone shifted something again. I lifted my eyes to meet his, holding his gaze this time without looking away, without shrinking back, and when I spoke, my voice was steady, not loud, not defiant, just clear in a way it had never been before. Maybe I do not want easy anymore, I said, and the moment the words left my mouth, I felt it, not relief, not safety, but something else, something stronger, something that felt like the beginning of a decision rather than the end of a situation. He watched me for a long second, something unreadable passing through his expression before it settled back into that familiar calm. And then he gave a small nod, not agreement, not approval, just acknowledgement, like he understood that whatever happened next was no longer something he could control. I turned then, moving toward the door, the card still in my hand, my steps steady even though my heart was not. And as I reached for the handle, I paused just long enough to take one full breath, to feel the weight of everything behind me and everything ahead of me at the same time. And then I opened the door and stepped out, not because I knew where I was going, but because for the first time, I was choosing to go somewhere different and somewhere across the city. I knew that the man who had seen through everything I tried to hide was not waiting for me to stay the same. He was waiting to see if I would finally stop pretending.